Welcome everybody to a Halloween special. So unlike last year where I did a horror film every day in terms of reviewing it, I'm going to take a bit of a different approach this year, and we're going to do more like horror Halloween spotlight videos. So looking at a specific actor or a specific film, and just concentrating more on that than doing one film a day. So for this Halloween spotlight, we're going to be looking at actor Vincent Price, who icon of horror films, quite frankly. He lived between May 27th, 1911 and October 25th, 1993, dying at the age of 82. I've seen 38 films in total from him, including a cameo, but I own 24 films from him in total, also including that one cameo, which stretched from 1940 to 1990 in terms of his career that I've seen films from. But the film that I own stretched from 1940 to 1988. So, 5 decades or so, thereabouts. And, starting off with, he was in the Invisible Man series. He was in The Invisible Man Returns from 1940, the first sequel in the series. And, he plays the Invisible Man himself. So you don't really see him in the film, not up until the end, but you do hear him and his iconic voice. So, he's really, really good in that. It's easily the best sequel of the bunch, which isn't the case for the other horror icons from that time. The Frankenstein and Dracula films at least had one or two other sequels that are really rather good, but unfortunately the Invisible Man series did not get that kind of job. There are two films that aren't horror films that I own, so we'll quickly look at those. And the first is 1944's Laura, and then 1946's Dragon Wick. He's great in both, but these are the last two normal serious dramatic roles from him that I own. So really rather good films, but not horror films. So we'll skip over those. And then we have his cameo in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Now, there was an Abbott and Costello Meet Invisible Man, and he is the Invisible Man in this at the end as a cameo. So I'm not sure why he never got that role. It was only 3 years later, so it's a little bit of a shame that he never got to make the return, because as well as a really rather good dramatic actor and a really rather good horror icon actor, he's also quite funny as well. If you've ever seen any of his interviews, he's really rather funny in them. So he would have been perfect in the Invisible Man one that Abbott and Costello did, but sadly he only ended up being a cameo in with those two, which is a bit of a shame. And then the film that really transformed his career. Yes, he'd been in a couple of horror films before, but he was mostly in film noirs, dramatic roles and stuff like that. So this film, House of Wax from 1953, is really what spurred his career off into the horror genre, because it was a huge success. He was really great in it, got a lot of praise for it at the time, and he is excellent in it. And easily one of the best horror films from the 50s. And you can also see this in colour as well, I think. It had a colour version of it, I think, at some point. But it also has the Mystery of the Wax Museum, which was the original version of this. So this is technically a remake, but I'm not seeing it in 3D though, because I don't have a 3D TV. So not sure how it comes across in that. But Price himself is great. And here you can see him in the film yourself. There he is, with his hands up like that. So he's really, really great in the film. And then he quickly followed that up with 1954's The Mad Magician, which is similar to House of Wax in a lot of ways. Not quite as good though, as that similarity is hard to get away from. But Vincent Price is once again really, really rather great. And as you can see, he's looking as mad as ever there. So fitting in with the title there. So he's really rather good once again, but the film is less so. But then a film that isn't poor, and he's really rather great in it equally, is The Fly, the original from 1950, 8. So 4 years after The Mad Magician, so a little bit of a gap. But still, cracking film. And obviously it get remade in the 80s by David Cronenberg. I do apologise, but I am suffering with a cold at the moment. So I just need to wipe my nose. But he's great in that. And it's easily, again, one of my favourite horror sci-fi films from the 50s, because it does have a sci-fi element to it, with the whole genetic swapping of the fly and the human characters. So it's really rather good. And then from 1959, the the second collaboration I feel with William Castle, and that is The Tingler. So yeah, they did the Haunted House, Haunted House on the Hill originally. I'm sure I'm getting that title wrong, but yeah, they did that first, and then they followed it up with The Tingler, and yeah, this is my favourite of the two between William Castle and Vincent Price, and yeah, really effective at getting across this whole creature that you can't really see, and yet you got the perception of it being there, and yeah, really, really fantastic, and yeah, one of my favourites from William Castle, purely because Vincent Price, as per usual, is great in the film. But then we have the first of his several collaborations between him and Roger Corman, and that is The Fall of the House of Usher, also known as House of Usher, and yeah, really, really solid start to their career. Not the peak of the Corman Price collaborations, we'll get to that in a minute, but still, excellent film, and yeah, clocks in at less than 80 minutes, so it's in and out before you know it, and yeah, and yet Vincent Price makes a big impression. Then another one for between Corman and Price, The Pit and the Pendulum, also from this is actually a year later, 1961. Yeah, it is. Yeah. So the year after that one, and yeah, again, it's another Poe adaptation. This is another thing between them. It's not just Corman and Price, but also adapting Poe, the works of Edgar Allan Poe, and yeah, again, Vincent Price is really rather great. You can see that they're getting more and more in the way of production value as you go along. And then again, between Poe and Corman and Price, we have Tales of Terror. So this takes a few of the stories from Poe's work. So it's got Morella, The Black Cat, and The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar. Again, a really rather solid effort all round, but yeah, also one of the stronger horror anthology films. Keeps it nice and tight at less than 90 minutes. All those three aspects to it, all those three stories get a a good amount of time between them, and yeah, it's really rather good as a whole. I think the Black Cat one is my favourite, but that's typically one of my favourite Poe adaptations anyway, as we had one from the 30s and then one from the 80s, and they were all really rather solid. And then we have not a Corman one this time, but a oh yeah, it is Roger Corman directing it, but it's a bit different to the other ones purely because it's a lot darker, and it's Tower of London from 1962. So yeah, 60 years old now this, and yeah, it's still extremely effective as a horror film, and yeah, Vincent Price is a lot darker in this one. Usually in his roles he's got a little bit of a lighter side to him, but in this one it's pure darkness, and yeah, this is why it's not probably the most highly regarded of the bunch, but it's definitely one of the ones that needs to be seen at least once. And then we have a more comedy horror effort, and that is The Raven, which not only has Price in it, who's excellent as usual, but it has Peter Lorre and Boris Karloff. So you've got two other horror icons in the film, and yeah, they all work really well together, and yeah, it really does show off Vincent Price's comedic chops, as yeah, he is funny in this, and the film as a whole is funny. I do appreciate this more now than I used to. I didn't really get along with this originally because I didn't really connect with the comedic element, but yeah, still great effort and definitely worth watching at least more than once. And then we have The Haunted Palace. Again, another Poe adaptation. Again, another Roger Corman directed one. He also produced this one. And yeah, Raven came out in 1963, and this one came out in 1963 as well. Again, less than 90 minutes, but again, Haunted Palace is really, really rather good. And yeah, it's all about warlocks and, magic in some respects, but still an effective horror film. And then also from 1963, we have The Comedy of Terrors. So again, Vincent Price is given the chance to show off his comedic chops in another comedy horror film. And again, you have Peter Lorre and Boris Karloff. But this one is directed by Jacques Tourneur. It's not a Corman adaptation. We'll get to the last of those in a minute. But yeah, still really, really funny and really, really well done. I love the interactions between Price and Peter Lorre especially. And then the last of... Nope, the second to last even. But this one isn't an hour video release. It is The Mask of the Red Death. Now this is a peak of the Coleman and Price collaborations, quite frankly, because it's got gorgeous cinematography, really great production, and yeah, Vincent Price is once again excellent. And yeah, this release by Studio Canal is really well done as well. And yeah, Vincent Price looking quite insane, but then that's just the way the film ends up going. And yeah, finally, between Coleman and Price, as well as being an Edgar Allan Poe adaptation, is The Tomb of the Ligeia. Now this is the one I've seen the least out of the bunch, from 1965. So I'm not overly familiar with it. I think I've only seen it the once, but again, I do find Vincent Price to be entirely engrossing and really, really entertaining. So yeah, again, another well worth watch from that. And finally, from the 1960s at least, from 1968 we have Witchfinder General, and again, like Tower of London, Vincent Price in this is playing a really dark character. No light side to this character whatsoever, and yeah, it's really rather quite brutal. And yeah, it's one of the few from him that is rated an 18, which yeah, I don't think any of the other ones have been. The max has been 15. So yeah, that kind of gets across how dark this really is, about, you know, burning witches and basically persecuting people that haven't done anything wrong. And Vincent Price is once again excellent in that role. Now, moving into the 1970s, we have from 1971, The Abominable Dr. Phoebes. Now, yeah, excellent film. Again, easy 4.5 out of 5, and yeah, Vincent Price is great in it as the titular Dr. Phoebes, and yeah, it's really, really well done. And yeah, can't say much about the rest of the cast. I don't think of it. Yeah, the only person in there I've heard of is Joseph Cotton, but it's directed. It's produced by Samuel Z. Arkoff, who's done a lot of the you know, the older Price films in terms of production. So yeah, again, another well worth watch from them. Unfortunately, it was followed up by a sequel that is not quite as good, and that is Dr. Phoebes Rises Again from 1972. So only a year later, but yeah, it's unfortunately nowhere near as good as the first film. Still solid, because Price, as usual, makes any lesser film still, you know, an average watch, but he is unfortunately the only thing really that's going for that film. So a little bit of a letdown in terms of a sequel, but Price is, as per usual, a decent, at least elevates what is a decent film to an average film. But what isn't an average film is Theatre of Blood from 1973. Probably I think this is probably his best from the 70s. Slightly pips Dr. Phoebes, purely because the rest of the cast worked really well with Vincent Price, who again is excellent. And yeah, he's basically a guy going around getting revenge on the people that snubbed him for a critical award, and he ends up killing all of them in a Shakespearean manner. So yeah, using the murders from Shakespeare plays to kill his critics. So yeah, really well done. And yeah, probably my favourite of the Price films that I own. So yeah, that's quite frankly his peak in his career, but it doesn't nosedive after that, thankfully, because from 1981 we have The Monster Club. So he's only really in the in-between bits of this film. He's not really in the entire film at all. He's more of a narrator or an instigator into the story, I think. Again, I can't overly remember, but yeah, he works really great in it. It's got Donald Pleasance, John Carradine, Britt Eklund, and Patrick McGee in it. So yeah, he's part of an ensemble cast, but he is really rather great in it regardless. So yeah, so again, well worth watching. But you will see in his later years that his roles did diminish in terms of length, purely because of his age. He couldn't obviously be in a starring role anymore. But the last of the ones that you technically could say is a starring role, and that is House of the Long Shadows. Now this is from 1983, and yeah, it's a pretty overall solid film. Granted, I wish the 4 leads had bigger roles in it, because not only do you have an icon in horror, Vincent Price, but you also have iconic horror film actors like Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and John Carradine. And yeah, I'd like to have them have a bigger role, but what time there is with them, which is still a solid amount of time, is perfect. And yeah, they are really, really rather good in it overall. So yeah, definitely a later career effort from Vincent Price that is well worth watching. And finally, in terms of my collection, we have Dead Heat from 1988. Much smaller role in this than, say, the previous film. He's only really in it in a couple of scenes, I feel, but he is a crucial character in the film. But yeah, when I was going through my seeing as many Vincent Price films as I could in 2020, I think it was, I ended up watching this not even knowing that it was in this, and yet when I saw him, it just lit up my eyes. So yeah, well worth seeing for that. But yeah, still overall a solid zombie horror comedy film. So yeah, well worth seeing that as well. But yeah, he was also in other great films as well. He was in From a Whisper to a Scream, which is another 80s film that is well worth seeing. He was in the sequel to The Fly, Return of the Fly, which isn't as good as the first film, like Dr. Thebes Rises Again, but still a solid effort. And then also on House on Haunted Hill. So yeah, that's again another really solid film. For some reason, that hasn't been given a Blu-ray release, even though it's in the public domain. I would have thought you'd have been able to, regardless of that, but apparently not. And then yeah, I'm probably missing a couple of others from him, but yeah. Oh yeah, he was also in Edward Scissorhands, again in a smaller role like in Dead Heat, but still, it was nice to see that he was able to at least be in a big blockbuster film like that. Because yeah, Tim Burton was a massive fan of Vincent Price. He always wanted him in one of his films. He even did a short in the 80s called Vincent, which is really rather good. So yeah, it was nice that Vincent Price was able to be seen by another new audience, because obviously Edward Scissorhands came out in the 90s, 1990 in fact, and yeah, obviously Price unfortunately died only a few years later. So yeah, it was nice to get him that he had that other kind of significant role, and I think that was probably the first film I actually saw him in, because it's obviously a lot less violent and a lot less dark. That film, it's a lot less dark than his other efforts, so it's a bit more kid friendly, that film. So that's probably why I saw that first. But yeah, still fantastic actor. Had a great innings, quite frankly, in terms of how long he lived, and he didn't just go out with a like a whisper at the end of the day. He was still working well into his 70s. So yeah, fantastic actor. It's a shame that he died before I was even old enough to even appreciate him. But still, fantastic array of films and a great career, and yeah, definitely one that should still be celebrated. And I'll definitely be doing that next year to celebrate his to mourn his passing 30 years ago. So yeah, looking forward to that in some kind of ways, but it's a little bit of a kind of a somber mood as well, because yeah, watching someone that's a favourite of yours that is no longer around. But still, if you've never seen a Vincent Price film, I do highly recommend seeing his films, especially in terms of the horror genre. Obviously, he had some dramatic and film noir efforts like Dragonwyck and Laura. He even had a later dramatic effort in like the late 80s, which is apparently decent as well. But yeah, definitely check out his horror films, and yeah, I'm sure you won't be disappointed. But nonetheless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.